World number 3 Hikaru Nakamura takes on Dai Changren from China. This is going to be an interesting game because Hikaru with the white pieces opens the game with 1 e4. Dai Changren, he's a strong player. He plays e5. His rating is 2500 and Hikaru brings his knight out to f3. It's going to be a solid game. Knight c6. Will it be the Rui Lopez or will it be the Italian? That remains to be seen. Hikaru plays his bishop to c4. It's the Italian on the board. And now black also plays his bishop to c5. Top players are considered to be great experts in the Italian opening because they are very well versed with the subtleties there. Knight f6, we will get to see if Hikaru is better prepared than his opponent. He plays his pawn to c3. All very standard stuff. Black goes pawn to d6. And now Hikaru can either short castle here. Yes, he does. He castles it out. And then eventually the ideas revolve around knight d2, rook e1, h3 and so on. Black also castles it out and now Hikaru brings his rook to e1 here. A useful move defending the pawn on e4. Maybe later you want to go d4. So a5 played. d4 might be a little premature because here bishop will simply drop back to a7 and this tension may be okay for black. So for the time being, Hikaru doesn't rush into it. He plays his pawn up to h3. This is one of the things in the Italian. You have to be patient. You don't need to hurry. Bishop goes back to a7 by Dai Changren. And now one of the ideas for black is to maybe trade the bishop with bishop e6. And that's the reason why Hikaru plays his bishop back to b3. And one of his points is that if you play bishop e6 to trade the bishops, he will just avoid it with bishop c2 here. You could also trade and give your opponent doubled pawns, but then it opens up the rook's path to the knight. So it's not a very simple decision. He goes bishop c2, keeps the bishops on the board, and now later on with the bishop nicely placed here, you go d4 and open it up. The only problem that you will see here, knight e7 played by Dai Changren, is that after d4, which is a very logical move, it's not so easy to open up this bishop because the pawn on e4 stops it. Hikaru goes d4 and I think black should not take here on d4 because then after takes e5 really becomes possible and this bishop opens up. So you need to maintain this structure, which is the reason why black goes knight g6 and further reinforces the e5 point. So Hikaru needs to continue. He is thinking what is the way in which he should play. He goes bishop to e3. Now notice how in such positions one of the plans that black generally has is knight h5 to f4, activating that knight. It's not so easy to play it right away because here there are tactics after d5, bishop moves, I take the pawn and the knight would be hanging. So for the time being, Dai Changren very rightly plays his pawn to c6. So he prevents white from going d5. He would himself go d5 at some point. Hikaru finishes his development with knight d2. Maybe he will play knight f1 to knight g3. The knight would be well placed there. And now black does go knight h5. And yes, it's a bit loose and knight e5 generally is a tactic that could work. But here the d4 pawn is attacked twice and that's the reason why it does not work. Black is back in the game. So Hikaru doesn't go for any such tactics. He plays bishop d3 and notice this little maneuver by Hikaru. Knight f4, and it's very interesting because this bishop is back where it began its life from, right on the board. It started from f1, it went to c4, b3, c2, d3 and f1. Took 5 moves to come back, but I think one of what it has achieved is that now later on you could push g3 and defend this and maybe the bishop would be well placed on g2 perhaps. f6 played by Dai Changren, interesting move. He's solidifying e5 and his idea is to push d5. Meanwhile, Hikaru goes king h2, defending the pawn so that g3 is possible. Now the h3 pawn is defended twice. So bishop f7 played here by black, making space for the knight to go back to e6 when it is pushed away. The game is around equal, very strategically rich, because you see all the pieces are still on the board. None of them are traded. Very, very complex chess here. So a4 played by Hikaru, and now bishop b8 played by Dai Changren, and he sees that there is an opportunity. If you look in this direction, the white king is standing there, so it can become pretty nasty there. Hikaru pushes the knight away with g3. Now the knight has to move away, and I think he will play it back to e6. There are no sacrifices really possible. Although you can keep the knight there, by the way. You can play bishop c7, and if I take, you can take back and the bishop is trapped. But okay, black doesn't want to get into that. He goes back, and Hikaru now improves the position of his queen and places it on c2. Black now has a very nice move, d5, because this central break is just the move he's waiting for, but actually he doesn't play it. He plays bishop c7. Can Hikaru now push d5? That would be a good move. No, he first wants to bring his final piece into the game. He plays rook a d1. He brings all of his pieces into the game, nicely centrally posted, and the pieces are doing pretty well here. Queen e7 played by Dai Changren. This was not a good idea, because now seriously d5 is a big problem, and Hikaru pushes it with 37 minutes left on the clock for Hikaru and 36 minutes for Dai Changren. The position does look around equal, but after knight g5 played, this seems very good. Knight takes g5 by Hikaru. F takes g5 taken by Dai Changren. This is the first exchange that has happened on move number 22. And now you might want to play here c4, but Hikaru ignores it. And the thing is, if you really are tempted to take this pawn, Hikaru has seen that he can put his knight on e4 and all his pieces are beautifully activated. So that's the reason why b4, ab4 has been played, and now I think he will take it back. C takes b4. This position is just so instructive, because even though in many lines the a4 pawn would also hang, like take, bishop takes, knight e4, bishop takes, queen a, rook a4. Even here with two pawns down, white is clearly better with, let's say, a move like rook a1. So anyway, Dai Changren was not tempted by winning of the pawn. He went rook f c8, and Hikaru improved his position of the queen by going to b3. White is clearly better here because he has more space, but Dai Changren thinks that his position is solid enough. He has pressure on d5. The queen is also in the bishop's line of action. Bishop c4 is a great move, because now you do threaten to take on c6, and slowly and steadily Hikaru is getting all his pieces on their right squares. Knight f8 played. Now this knight really wants to be on a better square. How do you achieve it? Maybe knight b1 could be an idea, but first rook c1. The rooks may be better placed on d1 and c1. So Hikaru plays there, and actually the waiting game has become too much for Dai Changren, so he takes on d5. But now after bishop takes d5, white is completely better here. Yes, he takes bishop d5, knight comes out to d7, and the knight is going to attack the bishop here on d5. That's the plan. So he plays queen d3 here, and also notice that now the threat is to take bishop b7. If you were to play here, bishop b7 is a very strong move and you lose the bishop. So he plays bishop b6, offering a trade of rooks, the bishops, and everything here. So Hikaru has many options. He goes knight to c3 here directly. Well, he could also have taken first on c8 and then gone knight c4, which was much stronger way to play. But he goes knight c4, and Dai Changren captures the bishop on e3. and now Hikaru can recapture back with the knight. It's the best move. He takes back with the knight, and the knight is looking at this very beautiful square on f5. If you play g6 to protect it, the b7 pawn is hanging, so you can't really do it. He takes on c1, and actually an automatic move is to recapture back on c1, but you will see that Hikaru actually pauses. He takes his time, and this is the sign of a great player, and he plays an intermezzo, knight f5, hitting the queen. Clearly rook e1, knight e7 is better for white, so that's the reason why he goes queen f8, saving his queen. But now Hikaru can recapture with rook takes c1, and he has total control over the position. His knight is beautiful, the pawn on d6 is weak. He goes knight f6, but I think that's just now going to lose material. You can just take here on b7, which is a nice move. Yes, Hikaru takes it, and you really don't want to play rook a4, because now after rook c8 there's a pin here, and you have to go ultra passive with the queen moving in. So that's the reason why he goes rook d8, trying to preserve his material, but already Hikaru is pawn up, and not just a pawn up, he has two connected passers on the queen side. He goes rook c7, moves his rook to the 7th rank, and now the two pawns are ready to rock and roll and move ahead. What does Dai Changren do here? He goes king to h8, and now does Hikaru slowly start pushing his pawns forward? Well, this is where it's important to be careful. He goes queen c2, and maybe he just wants to play rook c8 and trade off all the pieces on the board. That could be his idea. d5 pushed, and now he goes queen to c5. If you take the queen, then I take back with the pawn, I attack your bishop, g7 is loose. So that's the reason why Dai Changren takes on e4, and this was a well calculated decision now by Hikaru, giving up the pawn but trading the queens, because all endgames are better for him. Rook takes f8, and now there's this move, nice little move. You can trade the rooks, but knight e7 is a classy move, because with this he's attacking d5, and also the g6 square is under pressure. If you were to play knight f2, I can take knight d5. Oh, he does take knight f2. Now you can take with the knight, or you can take with the bishop. Both moves look very tempting, and Hikaru actually takes with the bishop here on d5. You will see that the American GM has actually kept all his pieces on good squares and not really pushed his pawns, because once the path is clear, he can win it. Two moves win now. One is knight takes d5, but the other one also knight g6, and Hikaru really puts in that effort to calculate, and after king g8 he's going to pick up the rook. Materially, black is doing brilliantly here. If you think about it, black has two minor pieces for a rook. Both sides have 4 pawns apiece, but it's not about quantity, it is about quality in the position. These two pawns are absolute monsters there, and after king takes f8, Hikaru plays rook c5, and you will see that now there's no stopping these pawns. In fact, he's also going to win one pawn here on e5, when black will have absolutely no counter play, and then it's totally done and dusted. He takes the pawn on e5, and I think the position is almost resignable here. Hikaru has played this game so well. He's played it positionally beautifully. King does come to e7, and I think it's the time to push your pawn to a5 and make a queen. There you see Hikaru final thoughts there, pushes his pawn to a5, and Dai Changren, I think, should throw in the towel here. It's all over. He has been outplayed by the world number 3. Hikaru wins the game, Dai Changren resigns, and Hikaru moves on to 2 out of 2 and takes the lead in the tournament. Magnus lost, so that's a big result, but Hikaru was flawless.